Hi, and welcome to the Société Santé en Français webinar. I am Nathalie Bowen, Communication and Knowledge Broker Officer for Société Santé en Français. It will be a pleasure to be your host for this webinar. Today's webinar is offered in English. It is entitled, Does Research Support or Place a Burden on Your Organization? It's time to talk about our relationship with research. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to live on this land. A few words on Société Santé en Français. Société Santé en Français is a national group of 16 provincial, territorial, and regional networks that are committed to improving the health of all Francophones and Acadians living in minority communities in Canada through greater access to quality healthcare services in their languages. The webinar objectives are as follows: improve access to new information, facilitate evidence-based decision-making, and foster interactions between information providers and users. They are possible with the financial contribution of Health Canada. Today's speakers are Sarah Bowen and Ingrid Botting. They are two authors of the guidebook, It's Time to Talk About Our Relationship with Research. Their careers have focused on making research useful to the health system, and they bring leadership experience with both embedded and partnership research roles. Sarah Bowen, PhD, is an applied research and evaluation consultant living in Nova Scotia. Following a career in community-based health program development, she became founding director of the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority Research and Evaluation Unit. She went on to become associate professor at the School of Public Health, University of Alberta, where she developed and taught courses in engaged scholarship and knowledge translation. Sarah's research has focused on strategies for promoting action on issues of low awareness with the health system and on developing research partnership among diverse stakeholders. Ingrid Botting, PhD, came to healthcare following doctoral work in social history and postdoctoral work in applied health research. Lack of opportunities for university work to influence policy or health system design led her to leave the university to work within the health system. She has been working full-time in a large health services delivery organization for the past 16 years and is currently corporate secretary of the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority, where she has responsibility for strategic alignment and policy for the region. Ingrid also maintains an appointment in the Department of Community Health Sciences, University of Manitoba, where she uses her combination of practical and academic experience to help bridge the university and health delivery worlds. Before we hear or have the opportunity to listen to our speakers, I would like to cover a few elements of logistics. There are different ways for you to participate and interact throughout this webinar. You can do so in writing by using the chat box or the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. As well, we will invite you to take part in a few polls. The polls are anonymous and optional, but we welcome you to participate. And talking about polls, let's have a first question here. So you see it on your screen at this time. The question is as follows: have you or your organization been involved in research projects? Just a single choice of answer. Yes, once or twice, not sure. Yes, often, it's part of my job, or never. Please vote and press submit. while people are voting, I would like to inform you that we've got participants from different provinces in Canada, Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick. So we are thrilled to have all of you on board for this webinar. Now, do we have the results of this interactive poll now? Okay, so for 86% of you, it is part of your job. For 7%, you've participated once or twice, and 7% of you, you're not sure. So this is right on. We've got a good idea of who is behind the screen at this time. So now I will stop sharing my screen and I will invite our speakers, Sarah and Ingrid, to proceed. Ladies.
Thank you. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Thank you, Nathalie, for that introduction. And Ingrid and I are both really pleased to be able to be part of this webinar today. J'aimerais bien être parfaitement bilan, mais ce n'est pas le cas. Et je devrais vous adresser en anglais pour cette présentation. I wish I could do it in French. And right now, the guidebook that we're going to discuss today is only available in English, but the French version will be out, we hope, by the beginning of June. And the link for getting in touch with us and getting a copy of the guide, which is available at no cost for download, will be on our last slide of the presentation. So now I'm going to call up our presentation. As Nathalie mentioned, Ingrid and I both are sort of in a unique position that we're trained as researchers, but have worked most of our careers with the health system. And over the last several years, there's been increasing expectations that researchers do collaborate and develop partnerships in response to health system needs. And at the same time that those expectations are developing, there's been very little to support organizations in participating in a really productive way. So that is going to be our focus, the focus of our presentation today, and really looking at it from the issues of collaboration in research from the perspective of people within health organizations. I'd like to begin with this quote from the CEO of a large urban health authority. And the requests that are referenced here were not for clinical or bench science. They were for health services research, which has been the focus of the work that we do. And we were finding some of these concerns even before COVID, which of course, you know, the pandemic has put greater stress on the organizations everywhere. So what we hope to touch on today is to provide an overview of the new guidebook. It's time to talk about our relationship with research, a bit about how it came to be, a brief discussion about the importance of clarity of concepts, like what does it even mean when we say research? We'd like to spend some time talking about considerations for organizations before they decide what they're actually going to do about research expectations or research activities, and then talk both about how to respond to requests that come from outside the organization, but also how to go about developing a proactive plan that might be a fit for your organization. And when I say organization, in a large organization, sometimes these activities can also be addressed at the program level as well. So the guidebook is based on pan-Canadian research that we undertook to explore the perspectives and the experiences of health system personnel with research partnerships. And what we found out is there was very limited information about the perspectives of those within health organizations. It was all written, the literature mostly was written from the perspective of researchers themselves. So we had an advisory committee of senior health leaders from across Canada who oversaw the project. They also participated very actively in interpreting the findings. We also had a draft report that went back to all the people who participated so that we could say to them, you know, do we get this right if we left anything out? And also had a chance to present some initial findings at a couple of national conferences. And that also helped strengthen the confidence in what we were finding. Now, we did publish on, as academics do, right? They publish on what they found. But we really heard the message that we've got to get beyond describing challenges and moving on to identifying action. Now, what were some of the key research findings that affected the resource that we developed? First of all, many people told us that research was often experienced as less than useful, we would say. Many organizations reported that there was not shared responsibility for different activities such as quality improvement, research evaluation. They may belong in different units or responsibility of different individuals. A lack of consensus on what research means and what it is. And while both academics and health leaders identified barriers to partnership, the emphases were different. And two main themes that came up talking to people from within the health system is the barrier of the huge stress that organizations were under. And this, again, this was pre-pandemic. And also the limited preparation of researchers for actually working with the health system. So a number of people, you know, really talked in detail about some of their frustrations in trying to work in partnership. And it was interesting to see that quite different people in different parts of the country came up with this concept of the need for more humility. So the result of all of this was this, this guidebook. And we think that it might be of most interest to those who are starting to think about, you know, what is our role in research, or are we going to accept research partnerships, invitations? But we also believe it would be, could be of interest to those who already have initiatives underway, but maybe want to take a fresh look at how things are going. Throughout the presentation, we'll be highlighting some sections of the guidebook, which includes a number of tools and strategies. And you'll notice that there's 6 main sections, and the guidebook is color-coded. And the first section, we discuss a number of issues that affect research-related activities in health organizations. Recognizing that research and research partnerships can help organizations achieve all of these goals. But, and this is a big but, unless organizations take charge of these relationships, it's unlikely that these potential benefits will be achieved. And they may actually cost the organization time, money, frustration. A complicating factor that was reported by most of those we interviewed is that there are often major differences, even within the same organization. in individual understandings of what research is and how it relates to other knowledge generating activities like evaluation and quality improvement in a learning organization. So research to some people was very limited. Oh, you know, it's not research unless it's a randomized controlled trial. Other people would say, well, I did a quick Google search for 20 minutes and that's research. And other people had really broad and thoughtful definitions. So probably a bit tired of hearing me, so I'm going to pass over to Ingrid now.
Hello. So we just have a quick poll because we want to hear from you. What challenges do you find with research? None. Not useful to priorities we have, do not have time or resources, or other.
Please choose an option and we will share the results as soon as we get 70% of you participating in the poll. Thank you.
So time and resources was a big one. It would be interesting to know what other is. So maybe folks can comment on that at the end of the presentation or if there's time. Thank you. So we have another one. Just wait till it comes up. For what kinds of decisions does your organization use research? Priority setting, program planning, advocacy, other, or don't know. It varies from area to area. Look forward to your responses.
May I add, if you choose the box other, you can fill in the chat, use the chat box and just maybe explain what this means to you. Thank you.
Yeah, we're really interested in people's perceptions. That's what, and experiences. And every organization has its own context. So there's such a wide variety of, I work in research support, so not able to. So mostly program and organizational planning, don't know, advocacy, very little on priority setting. Thank you for the chat. We'll catch up on them after the presentation. So thank you for answering the polls. I just wanted to make a comment about this concept of learning organizations, while they sort through the frozen screen issue. So over the past 16, 17 years, I've worked in roles that require sort of a whole health system lens. And for the past 5 years, I've been corporate secretary working between the board and the executive team. So I have kind of a big view of healthcare. And there's a lot of language around nowadays around learning organizations. And as people might know, if you've been in healthcare for a while or any social sector, the language changes as new evidence emerges, and then people sort of glom onto it and start to use it. But I'd like to also comment on another sort of language that's happening right now in healthcare and initiatives around culture of safety in healthcare, which is about learning from mistakes and not, and really respecting people's ability to learn from their own actions and then have the system make changes based on some of those mistakes. So both of these things are trends right now. And I think that to be successful in either one, a real foundation is the culture of your organization. And so we can have frameworks and language, but it can't really be siloed. So learning from research, as we're talking about here, or partnering, it's all about, to be successful, it's about having an openness and a culture of curiosity and learning. So I think there's no one observation I've made is you can't silo a learning organization. It has to be embedded in everyday activity, but research can play a big role in that. So I think that was kind of my comment around that. I pass it back to Sarah.
Okay, next slide. So going back to the sort of a bit of a walk through the guidebook, the first main section, we take a look at really encouraging organizations to figure out where they are right now, right? So there's a few questions that we encourage organizations to consider, like what is the commitment to research in the organization's mission, vision, strategic plan, for example? Is more discussion needed? And what's the commitment of those in key leadership roles? Not what's their commitment, but also what is the knowledge level of the whole range of research approaches and methods and emphases? And very importantly, what is the organization doing now? What kinds of projects is the organization already involved in? How is that going? Does the organization even know all of the things that they're involved in? Next slide. So on page 8, we've actually developed a tool that helps people identify, like, what is their current position? What are, for each of those positions, what might some of the challenges be? What kinds of things should the organization be considering? And then some suggestions of how research itself might be able to help the organization meet that challenge. Next slide. What's really important is for any program or organization to clarify their own priorities before taking action, and to keep those in the forefront as they're negotiating research relationships. And it's also important to stress that every organization must develop a plan that is a fit for itself. Sometimes people might notice that, oh, well, this organization over here did that, and so maybe we should do that. But we would suggest, no, go back to the beginning and look at, what do you want out of these research involvements? Next slide. So in order to increase the likelihood that any action that's taken is going to be effective, from our discussions with those who have had success, we found that this was related to having 3 preconditions met. And these are that there's commitment to the importance of research from organizational leadership. Second, that there's a shared vision of what the benefits of this would be to the organization. And third, that there's organizational consensus on a broad definition of research and how it fits with other organizational learning activities. Next slide. So whatever action is taken, if it's going to be effective, really needs to be built on strong foundation. And sort of the 4 legs of that foundation that we identified were, first, inclusion of key stakeholders in planning. Next slide. I think there's much more awareness in the last couple of years of the historical exclusion from many from the decision-making processes. And this exclusion or the need for inclusion applies to the constituencies that an organizational serves, for sure, but also to staff groups within the organization that might be affected by any initiative. Another aspect of diversity, though, is the inclusion of diverse research experiences. Like it often happens that an organization has research strength. It has few people who are really strong in certain areas, but they may not be strong in every area. So a really common example might be a large hospital that has incredible strength in certain kinds of research, pharmaceutical trials, doing clinical research, but may have no strength or interest in doing community-based research, for example, on mental health. So because we research what we think is important, it's really important that there's a diversity of experiences around the table. Next slide. It can often take quite a bit of time to develop clarity on what the organization wants its research role to be and how it's going to approach research engagement. So this really emphasizes the importance of having those internal discussions. And another critical component is that there's the development of appropriate policy, that there's a structure and appropriate processes to support effective research initiatives. Because if these actions are not institutionalized, they can be vulnerable to a change in leadership, to being downgraded in the face of organizational crises, or even that the learning isn't shared within the organization. And finally, it's important to effectively communicate the organization's position. Next slide. A clear message both within the organization itself, which can be complicated in larger organizations, but also to the larger community and to academia. Next slide. And we have in the appendix some sample messages that we hope would give organizations some idea of how they might communicate what their position is to the broader community. Next slide. Oh, and you're lucky you get to hear Ingrid again.
So we're going to get sort of more practical. Not that we weren't before, but this gets more into an individual project and how organizations might respond sort of in the here and now. So most organizations receive unsolicited requests for researcher access to data. This is pretty common, or sites, or to partner on specific projects. So out of the research came a decision tree. And I'm going to walk you through that, but we do have a couple more questions for you first. Next slide, please. Has your organization been asked to provide access to data, clients or patients, site, or to partner on a research project? We're interested in whether this is something that you've experienced. So this seems to be a regular thing. So this will be interesting. And this decision tree that I'm going to go through in a moment has been quite useful for folks. Okay, so we have one more before we move on. One more poll. How confident are you in your organization's processes for deciding about these requests? Okay, so that's a nice split, and I'm sure it varies from organization to organization, as we see in the results. Thank you. So next slide. This is the decision tree that I was referring to. I'm going to walk you through a concrete example, just to sort of illustrate how this can help organizations. So, and I think it relates, there was a comment in the chat that I saw briefly of, I can't remember the person's name because I was focused on the presentation, but that sort of fit with the example that I'm going to walk you through, I think. So say your organization receives a request to host a study about challenges in accessing language appropriate services. So you consider the request as completely aligned with your organization's role and mandate and continue through the decision-making process. So if you see on the far left, the very far left where it says start, yeah, it aligns with our strategic priorities. So yes, we will entertain this partnership. So then you get to the next part of the decision tree. Are there potential organizational benefits of the research? You look more closely at the research question at this point in the process, in the proposal. It's going to a federal funding agency, and you realize that the research question stems from a national study comparing access to language across jurisdictions. But based on your organization's priorities in the here and now, it's not specific enough to the needs of your community and the people you serve. So theoretically, really good fit. We want to be part of a national study. It gives us profile, but when you really think about the time and our bandwidth as an organization, it doesn't really meet our needs. It's kind of waters down the issue for us. So no. So then we go to the bottom and say no. We could, you could move on and say yes, and then get to whether it's cost free to the organization. If you say yes, well, it's national, it'll give us profile, then you start looking at the costs. How much in-kind support is this going to require? Oh, they want a whole bunch of data and we need a full-time analyst to pull it. And it's going to go to a national database and not be granular enough for our own community involvement. Then you may end up saying no. So I'm not going to walk through a whole bunch of different scenarios, but that's an example of how this decision tree can help. I think we've lost the slides.
I think we're back on. Okay, so so far in the presentation, we've talked about two things. Some of the considerations that any organization should have before they start thinking about what should we be doing about research. And also some ideas of how to respond when and I think most of you have been asked to partner or be involved in a research activity. So now we'd like to move on to looking at the development of a more proactive response to these expectations. So there's two main ways to address organizational research needs. The first is to have planned collaborative research activities, which we're calling the interface model. And the second is to embed research expertise within the organization. And of course, there's many different versions of that can come up. Some models are mixed. Some organizations might do a bit of both. But it's really important to understand the advantages and the limitations of each of these responses. Many, many different possibilities. Again, the key consideration is what is the best fit for our organization. So the first approach is creating a health organization academic interface, many different alternatives. This is an approach that has both advantages and disadvantages, and we've outlined some of those in the guide for your consideration. One of the things I would like to emphasize is the potential pitfalls of individual relationships. So many organizations, they have a relationship, for example, between one or two researchers and a particular manager. That's not uncommon, but that really leaves all parties vulnerable. The researcher may be in trouble if there's a change in personnel. The organization may be making, all kinds of staff or monetary commitments that it may or may not know about. And there may not be the benefit of anything learned through that research actually being integrated into organizational planning and decision-making. So there's a number of questions that should be considered when organizations are considering developing an interface approach like this. And we've provided some discussion of these in the guidebook. We also have outlined some of the potential pitfalls that have been identified that are associated with these kinds of collaborations. And also try to identify, like, what are some of the steps that could be taken? What are some of the characteristics that are associated with success and could help you avoid the potential pitfalls that are there? When people talk about, collaboration and partnership, often we have this idea of happy families, right? That everybody's just cheerfully getting along together. But in real life, academic health system partnerships are often a bit more like the odd couple. But, with respect and with appropriate planning, even odd kinds of relationships could often be very effective. What we want to avoid is a situation where one partner is feeling they're doing all of the heavy lifting, or that anybody is feeling squeezed or disrespected or used in any way. Which brings us to the whole question of, what exactly do we mean when we say collaboration or partnership? And when we're talking about partnership, we mean meaning involvement in all phases of an activity and shared decision-making, which means shared power, right? Now, an important question to be aware of, and it's what I call who is driving the train, is this: is the research activity in response to organizational needs and priorities, or is it in response to a researcher interest? And then we get to where is the train going? What's the destination? And is the destination actually worth the price of the fare to the organization? And finally, is what is being proposed even realistic? Can we actually expect it to happen? We found quite a bit of frustration when we were talking to people within the health system of what people sometimes called so-called partnerships, right? And so it's really important that there is a discussion about what do we mean by partnership. What are our shared understandings of how this is going to take place? Because with planning and with respect, these can be very effective. Now, the second sort of main approach to responding to expectations of research involvement is to actually embed research capacity within the organization. And this is an approach that also brings both advantages and disadvantages. And most of these initiatives find these critical challenges: stability and sustainability of funding, how to find appropriate and supported staffing, how the activities will be integrated into organizational operations and decision-making, and also what will be the relationship with academia. We've had some discussion around each of these issues in the guidebook as well for those who are interested. And like the option of developing some kind of interface, there's a number of questions that we would encourage you to consider as you go about exploring this option. Now, before we wrap up, I just would like to say a few words about the importance of having a really well thought out implementation plan and an evaluation plan, not after, but that is planned before an initiative is underway. If an implementation isn't evaluated, and if things don't go as well as people would hope, you're never going to know. It was like, was this just not a very good idea? Or did we just make some mistakes in implementing it and planning it? And collaborative evaluation there'll always be snags along the way. But if there's collaborative evaluation, some problems can be avoided or they can be corrected in the early stages. And the organization can continue to learn as it goes through the often the difficult learning stages of a new initiative. We did find that while a lot of the organizations we spoke with had some interesting initiatives, almost none of them had been evaluated. So this means it's very difficult to be able to say, okay, you know, here's some findings that might be transferable to your setting. So it is important to work through what is a good fit for your particular organization. So what next? What we're hoping is that this presentation has whetted your interest a bit in exploring these questions in more detail. As we mentioned in the beginning, this resource is available for download with the French one coming. I would like to mention that and recognize that not only the guide, but the research on which it was based was supported by funding from the Integrated Knowledge Translation Research Network, which in itself is funded by CIHR, under the leadership of Ian Graham, who's one of the authors of the guide as well. We would really encourage you to contact us with any of your experiences, any of your suggestions. There's been very little work done in this area, so we know we're just at the beginning of a long process. So we'd love to hear from you, and our email address is there. And I'd also like to mention that we are hoping to be able to offer a Train the Trainers initiative for people who would like to develop more skills in actually digging deeper on providing leadership within their own organization. It's not confirmed, but we're keeping our fingers crossed on it. So thank you for your attention, and I hope we can turn it over for some questions and discussion now.
Yes, thank you very much, ladies. And yes, we would like to hear from you, participants from all over. If you have questions or comment, please, you can either use the Q&A box or the chat box, or raise your hand and we will open your mic so you can voice your question. Meanwhile, we do have a question for you. And just so that it leaves you some time to think and maybe write your own question. I was wondering for you participants who are online at this time, to what extent did the presentation resonate with your experience? Someone would like to share maybe bits and pieces of your experience? Please, we would love to hear from you. And I think there are, from the questions to the answers that you provided to the polls, I think that quite a few of you have already some sort of experiences with research or researchers. So do not hesitate to raise your hand, use a chat box or a Q&A. Maybe to allow participants to think about their questions and comments. Maybe I will add a first question to Sarah or Ingrid. In your experience, what is the key element, if there is such a thing? What is a key element to establish a healthy and fruitful relationship between both worlds, research and practice? I don't know, Sarah or Ingrid?
I think one of the keys, mutual respect. Like researchers and people working within the health system bring their own areas of expertise and knowledge, and there needs to be mutual respect for that. And then being prepared to actually have the discussion about how any partnership is going to work. Ingrid, did you want to add anything?
No, I think respect is really important. Also, health system, like, it depends on the organization and context is really important, but it's a pretty crisis-driven culture in healthcare, and people's time is operates in a bit different depending on what kind of organization you are. So it does take some creative, so it's not a partnership like any other. Sometimes it needs to be done with the principles, but there's kind of an art to it, and that's where talking it through really helps.
Thank you, ladies. And we do have one question by Geneviève Laferrière from Réseau Santé en Français du Sud of Ontario. Geneviève, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Hello?
Hi there.
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, this is my first time asking a live question in these webinars. So one of our main issues that we have when trying to incorporate research partners within our project is we often have faced in the past issues related to, you know, the ultimate the final report being applicable when dealing with having applicable information for organizations to implement strategies when low population density is an issue. Just wondering if you have any suggestions or strategies of how to overcome this.
So I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly, but like if there are research partners, the question is around whether the report that they provide actually is applicable to your particular situation or has any actionable information in it. I'm not, maybe you could give me a bit more information.
Certainly, I'll try to clarify. So we have worked in the past in collaboration with healthcare organizations and research partners to specifically look at, main issues, challenges, and priorities to be addressed to better serve minority Francophone populations. And being in Southern Ontario, the population density in a lot of the catchment areas is, you know, between 1% and 3%. So we have often encountered situations where a larger area needed to be looked at in order to provide data analysis. And then that just becomes an issue because it's too broad of, of data that's being considered for actionable items for a specific organization, let's say.
I think I understand. I think I understand now. And not an uncommon situation, but it sounds to me as though it's partly an issue of like being really clear about what is the research question and what is, and because sometimes there isn't even people think they have the same research question, but it isn't really nailed down. And then what is the best methodology to come up with the best answer for that question? So what we have found is that often researchers know they have a certain set of research skills, and they apply that set to whatever the question is. And sometimes it's not a good fit, right? So sometimes they say, well, they're really good at data crunching, but there isn't the data there. This is actually quite common when around questions of language access, right? Or the data quality is poor. Well, if that is the case, then are there other ways? Are there other methods that we could use to come up with really useful information? So if that is, I may not be speaking to your situation or your concern, but often these situations happen because there isn't real clarity in the beginning about what it is the organization needs and wants to find out, and then matching that with the best strategy for getting it. And sometimes research isn't the answer. Sometimes it's actually looking at the data and the research that's already there and saying how much of this is applicable to our situation. So these preliminary steps are absolutely crucial. Like sometimes they're skipped over, right? Because we have this idea, we're going to do this, and then move right into the project, but there's planning.
Now that answers it perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you, Geneviève. And we have another question from Carmen Loisel, who I think is with McGill University. Carmen.
Merci beaucoup. Hello, Sarah and Ingrid. Nice to hear from you and seeing that you're doing very cutting edge work. So that congratulations on this. I just wanted to add maybe a comment on what I really think is important. And Sarah, you mentioned the need for mutual respect between researchers and organization or clinicians. And I think that is so true. But there's also, I think, an aspect of win-win in these collaborations. So I think researchers have to think about what exchange of services can they work on or agree on with the clinicians. Because one thing I've noticed when I do research in clinical settings is often the clinicians are wanting to submit abstracts to conferences, or they want to write a report and they need help. And so maybe sometimes that collaboration is not directly related to the study that you want to implement, but really an exchange of favors in a way that you will review abstract, will give them feedback, and they really appreciate that. So I was wondering if you wanted to comment on this kind of win-win where they get something else out of that collaboration.
Oh, thank you for raising that point, because it is really important. And it's what, like, everybody does need to feel they're getting something out of it, and nobody needs to feel used. And it's not, as you're saying, it's certainly it's important to negotiate that and have respect around this particular project, but things are relationship based, right? And so if we have a good working relationship, it might go out into other areas. Like, certainly we can help you prepare something for this conference. And it's interesting, in the research that we did, some of the feedback we got, that a number of organizations were saying, the younger researchers like they really had hope for them, that they were interested and open and more interested in that kind of mutually supportive relationship, right? And the other point in this is it should be about a relationship, an ongoing relationship, not simply about, oh, what can I get out of this project?
Very true. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Carmen. We have one last question. I will read it in a few seconds. But before that, I would like to inform you that you will see a last poll appearing on your screen, and that allows us to evaluate the today's webinar and as well to think about the webinars to come. So please take some time to answer the questions and use the gray thing along the box of the question so that you roll the screen all the way down to the last questions. And when all the questions are answered, then please submit. The last question that we had here in your Q&A was the following. From your perspective, Ingrid and Sarah, how should knowledge brokers and others who support research better support this process? Any solutions, any hints for us?
Ingrid, would you like to kick this one off?
Sure. I think a knowledge broker, like I've played that role for a number of years, and knowing the culture of your organization and some of the norms and can really help a researcher get access to people. And there's always certain ways that are more effective in terms of communicating or bringing people on board. And so I think that's critical. And I think the question that Carmen answered, like bringing clinicians into it, especially in healthcare, and supporting them and their curiosity. So the knowledge broker can really take the time to build those relationships and has that skill that sometimes the experts just don't. So knowing that you don't have it and using someone else to help and listening can go a long way to successful collaboration.
And if I could just add something to that, and this is actually Ingrid's expression, suggested in one project that we were doing, that it was more useful to think about a relationship broker than a knowledge broker.
Very true. Thank you very much, ladies, Sarah and Ingrid, for this presentation. And we look forward to going online and going through that guide, as well as the French version that will be available in June. Thank you very much for your time today. And thank you to all of the participants for today's, it was greatly appreciated. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.